Hello and welcome to the Serious Games Podcast, all about playful methods for interactive trainings and facilitation. Let's get started. And today we're connected to London with Chris Caswell. Chris, we've met so many years ago. I think it's 6 years ago at Play 14 in Luxembourg, and I'm happy to have you on the show. We could talk about so many things like Play 14, the debriefing cube that we've developed. And interestingly, when I ask you, do you want to be part of the show, you immediately mentioned the ballpoint game. So today we're going to talk about this game and all the magic that you bring to it and to your participants. Once again, welcome, Chris.
Lovely to be here. Yeah, I like the idea that the classics are still classics and so useful for lots of different things. And there's a reason why it's a strong part of my kickback. So I thought it'd be quite interesting to talk about why. Because I'm a seasoned coach, been doing this a long time, but it's still one of my go-to things to do with teams when I meet them, and pretty much anywhere with the maturity will help me help them better.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Look, two things. What should our listeners know about you before we get started?
Cool. So I'm an agile coach, which means many different things to many different people. So generally, my career is about helping organizations transition into a better place. So that can mean lots of different things too. Generally, that means adopting a different way to deliver using agile practices. I can work with at a very team level, so working with teams, helping teams be successful for themselves, also work in sort of department level and organizational level, helping various different people kind of take some things out of our toolkit and change things for the better. But I guess for this type of game, and that's interesting actually, I use this game with many different types of people as well. I don't always use it with teams. Sometimes I use it with departments because it's still interesting, right? We should probably look at what is a ballpoint game for people who don't understand or have not come across it.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we can start with a 30 seconds pitch. How do you explain the game, the value of the game, to someone who has no clue what it is?
So it's really simple. So it personifies playfulness really well because it involves balls, right? So I typically use sort of ball pit balls, so the really colourful children's balls. Mostly because they're light. When the game was originally designed many years ago, it was designed with tennis balls. But I don't know if you've ever tried to carry 100 tennis balls around commuting. It's a right pain. So the 100 light ball pit balls are very, very cheap and very, very light to transport. And it involves moving these 100 balls from one location to another location. So these locations I have as baskets. So I have a basket of 100 balls here and the destination. And it's a team challenge. Okay, so it's how can you guys work together to move these balls from one basket to the other? Or how many can you get across in a particular period of time? So that's the general sense of it. But of course, there are some rules.
Okay. Now, before we get into the rules, Chris, what can a team or what can the players learn from the game? So which learning goals are you addressing?
That's the interesting thing about this game is that it's very versatile in terms of what you could draw out of it. So, I mean, obviously, we're very much into the debriefing world, right? So,
Right.
You could say that what the teams all get out of this game is whatever they get out of it, right? Because it creates all sorts of learning opportunities. I guess at the very, very top level, there's the sort of the easy or go-to or obvious stuff. It's continuous improvement. Right, so the game is structured around demonstrating how having a little bit of focus upon how we do things and our ways of working, and then choosing to experiment with that can pay off in terms of outcome significantly. And it kind of gamifies that a little bit, and it's artificial because it's the time is what it is, and you're learning new skills because you're not normally playing with balls, but it creates a really good analog for what introducing a continuous improvement culture within your organization can really achieve.
Okay, great, great. So you just shortly mentioned when it was originally designed, it was designed with tennis balls. But when did you start using it? And do you know who designed it?
I
Where it comes
I
from?
should know who designed it, but I can't think of who that is at the moment. But I know who introduced it to me. Was it's a friend of mine called Chris.
And when was that?
I must have been 10 years ago,
Hmm.
there or thereabouts. My friend Chris Selby, who's also a coach. And at this point in my career, I wasn't into gaming at all. I was learning my way as a Scrum Master at that point. And it was really finding Chris and seeing how he executed his practice using fun and playful elements, using experiential learning. Kind of gave me all sorts of epiphanies about how I could be better and how I could change my career. And I guess within that journey, the ballpoint game was a really big sort of kind of slap in the face almost, in terms of look how cool this was, how this experience was. That rather than just sort of standing up and talking to people about the value of continuous improvement or whatever it is, that we played this game and it was like the epiphanies were firing everywhere, and it was fun and stupid, and it was a good use of an hour. So yeah, Chris did it with. I think I was working with a team, and he came along and did it with us. It was
Okay.
using tennis balls because he's a classic traditionalist, and which is interesting because the game's a bit different with tennis balls because they've got a lot more weight to them. So that dynamically is a little bit different. But um, I learned it then, and I don't think I quite grasped it then and there about how powerful this game could be, but
Hmm.
it's sat with me over the years. And as my career changed, and I took the leap into using different strategies and different approaches to team development, and started playing with this sort of stuff, it was one of the first things I tried to use, and it worked. In fact, when I went to play full team the very first time, I think I played it there with people who play full team, and they already knew it, but it was still a great
Right.
opportunity to uh, you know try out some of these things and with a different set of people and with a much bigger group of people as well.
Hmm.
That's why.
Okay.
That's.
Wow.
I'm
So
not sure who made it though. I'm sure someone very famous came up with it.
yeah, definitely. We could look that up, and I can add the link to the show note to give the credit. But look, so you've been using this game roughly 10 years now, right?
Yeah, I
And
guess. Well,
I
there's
would
probably a curve there, right? So, as in an
right.
acceleration curve. So I use it a lot
Mm,
now.
mm,
And I guess over the last
mm.
sort of 4 or 5 years, I've used it more systematically in my practice, and before that, more
Yeah.
experimentally.
Great, great. And we will definitely get to the question later on. Does it work with, participants that already know the game or that watched a YouTube video or maybe even listen to this podcast? But let's get to this later. So you mentioned, just for the start, what do you need to prepare? Of course, you need those ball pit balls. I guess you mentioned like 100. I guess there you can buy sets of
Yeah.
100. You need two buckets, or you use anything that's available in the venue that you're at. What else do you need to prepare?
You'd probably need a flip chart or a whiteboard somewhere to write out the rules. So it would be too easy to. I mean, it'd be an interesting experiment just to get these balls from one place to another, right? But the rules serve kind of two purposes in the game. The first purpose is to make the task a little bit more tangible, right? So rather than
Right.
just putting balls from here to here, there's a couple of things you need to do in order to satisfy success. Okay,
Hmm.
and the second thing's um, a lot more gamey. The rules are designed in such a way to generate some cognitive biases within the people that are playing the game, anchoring them to a particular assumptions or particular realities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
which is really interesting because for me, one of the strongest and most interesting outcomes of the game is that it teaches you that you need to break the rules around you, or at least challenge the rules around you, in order to make significant improvements. Right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So hold on. You have the flip chart. You have the balls. You have a bucket. Anything else you need to prepare something? So do you write down the rules, or how is the
I
area?
arranged.
Um,
Yeah, so I do write. So generally, I write a post about because there was either human beings are really crap at remembering things. Okay, and the rules are, they're slightly wordy, not wordy. They're too much to people to remember just by talking at them. So writing them down is very, very useful and important. The other thing you need, and I tend to have it on the same poster, is a little bit of a score chart, because we're going to count how many balls they can move across in a 2-minute window of time. And then we're going to do that 5 times because the game is iterative. Therein is the continuous improvement demonstration that we will see that after doing this for 5 times and taking the opportunity to learn in between them all, that we can do better than we did on round 1.
Okay, all right. And are there any roles? Are there any other instructions for specific participants? So you mentioned, for example, you played it with a large group. What is the ideal group size?
This is an interesting question, right? So and the answer sort of goes slightly beyond my experience. So I have played with large groups of 40, 50, 60, but I tend to break them down into smaller groups. So which makes it sort of a competitive environment. We have small groups competing with each other to try and outperform each other. It also creates a different element of cognitive bias that teams assume they can't look and learn from other teams, right? And so you can enter that as well. That was never really a rule. That was never a constraint. Why didn't we see what those guys are doing? It's quite interesting. But if you look on YouTube and Google around, you'll see that other people have played this game with one team, but of a large amount of people, 50 to 100 people. And I have no experience of that. And so cognitively, I don't quite see how that would work, but it appears to be done.
Okay, so you love to break up into smaller groups. How large would a small group be then? I mean, are we talking about 5, 6,
I think
7?
you can probably tolerate up to 10, 12 people. So the more you get, the more complicated it's going to be for people to be properly participants. As in, because so for this to really be a great participant is to be part of the problem solving. Right, it's to be part of the conversation about what is it we can do better. So as soon as you go into the sort of even 10 is probably too many, because in that 10 you're going to have 2 or 3 people that are going to sit back and just listen and watch, right, and not really join in, which is sort of okay because they're still going to be observing the magic happen rather than be part of the magic happen. But for me, the best outcome is to be, express your ideas, express your frustration, express your confusion. All of those things that we like people to do within a team environment, because these are great analogs for actual team working as well.
Right. Okay. So the sweet spot is somewhere around 6 or 7
participants. I mean, it kind of follows the sort of the normal engineering team concept or good useful team concept. 7 plus or minus 2 is good.
Right. Okay. Great. So look, the room is arranged. The participants are there. The rules are written down. You got the scoreboard. How do you start? What are the steps and duration? You mentioned some iterations, and how do the flow moments develop?
Cool. So obviously we start with the invitation. So the invitation will vary depending on what we were doing before. Okay. So if we were already in a workshop, perhaps it might be actually what we're taking a break. Let's do something different. Or if we were, if we're going, it's cold, you might let's play a game. Who's up for a game, right? You want to try and hook them into the idea of doing something differently, right? Because generally speaking, and I think it's true, even though it doesn't seem very true from my point of view, but if I were to leave my bubble of the worlds from which I'm working, gamification, playfulness at work isn't very common. Right, it's unusual. People don't expect to walk into a meeting room and play with balls, right? And I know this is true because as soon as I do this in an organization, what happens first of all is that my desk starts looking like a kid's playroom, right? Yeah, so I've got baskets of balls and all sorts of things happening, and then I observe people walking past me, and you get like this double glances of what the hell's happening over here, right? These curiosities are immediately generated because this isn't normal. This isn't what we normally do at work. So when your invitation needs to consider that, to consider the people, and either you want to give them an idea that actually we're going to do something different and play a game, or if they're already used to that, say I've got a cool game to play, guys. Better go, right? So get them rallied up to this idea we're going to play a game. I don't tend to talk about why, Yeah, because I don't really,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really, because of you, your fault, and a debriefing queue in general, I'm really super sensitive about telling people what they're going to learn, right, or what you have learned, or what you should have
Mm.
learned, right?
Right.
So I try not to do that at
Right.
all. So I talk about we're just going to play a
Mm-hmm.
game, it's fun, and if I need to give them anything more, it's about problem solving, solving a problem as a team. Let's see how well you do, right? So that's kind of an invitation, all right? And I ask, and they're going to get a little bit of validation. You guys up for that, right? Who's up for that? You're going to, it's cool. It's cool. Let's do this. And generally, no one ever says, no, I'm not up for that.
All right, so you got them ready. You're gonna explain the rules next. You're gonna introduce them into the material, the scoreboard, and the
Yeah, well,
timers,
we start
right?
with the goal, right? So the goals is nice and clear when they get the balls from here to here, and that's a nice example of making it fun because you're going to be walking around with a big set of balls, which is silly and stupid, which is cool, right? So you,
Mm.
in doing that yourself as a facilitator, you're kind of enabling them to be silly and stupid because if you can be silly and stupid, also can they
Mm.
be, right? Also, there's a
Right.
trick here as well that allows you to put the baskets quite far away from each other. Right in that demonstration, I've
Mm.
got this basket here. It's going to go this side of the room. I've got this basket here. It's going to go that side of the room. So that's a facilitation
Mm.
trick to again give them an anchoring bias about this is where the baskets need to exist, right? Which isn't true, right?
Mm.
But it's just because I put them there, they assume it to be true. Okay, because this is good, right? So they're part of the success in the game is to challenge their own biases. And so you do that first, and then and you talk about okay, so the goal in the game is getting as many of these balls from over here into this bucket over here as you can in 2 minutes as a team. Sound good? Right, but obviously there are some rules to make that a little bit harder for you, right? And then we go through the rules about what they need to do in order to succeed to get a single ball across.
Okay. So how many rules are there? I mean, rule number
5 or 6
one.
things. So there's so this is an important part of the facilitation is conveying the rules, checking that they get the rules because what happens is because it's this really interesting game, right? So as soon as you start the game, the people's brains are whirling about how to solve this problem, right? So you'll be tempted to ask the question, does everybody understand? Right? Or even
Mm.
worse, are there any questions? And as soon as you ask the question, are there any questions? You're going to get a whole bunch of questions about, can we do this? Can we do that? Can we do the other? And I don't want to engage with that just yet.
Mm. You don't want to answer too many questions, or you never
But
answer questions.
you want them to think for themselves and discover for themselves, and really want a baseline, okay?
Mm.
Because they
Mm.
can optimize quickly if they try hard. And that's not a bad thing normally in the world, but in this game, because we want to create the biggest differential between the start and the end positions as we can, it's worth just getting into it, get playing, get going now. Because otherwise, you can get into a
Mm-hmm.
situation where they're talking to you for 5 minutes about what the art of the possible and what they could do. And really, the real world doesn't work that way. The real world just gets into get going now, and then learn as you go. And that's kind of the part of spirit
Mm.
of continuous improvement is that you get in the balance of doing and thinking right. So
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
say so facilitating the rules is quite important to go nice and slowly, and then sort of just check in that they got that individual rule as you go, right? So that
Mm.
when you get when you've done all of the rules together, you're in a position now to say, rather than say, are there any questions or do you understand? Say, okay, guys, you've got 1 minute to think about how you're going to succeed in this game. Starting now, go, right? So
Mm.
you can immediately apply a pressure
Okay.
and a time constraint.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. So walk us through the rules real quick.
Cool. So, and there's some facilitation tricks in this as well, because as a facilitator, you are trying to invoke cognitive biases, anchoring biases all the time, right? So you're creating for them a system, a reality around this game, which is designed
Mm-hmm.
explicitly to constrain them, right? So the first rule, for example, is that every ball must have airtime. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking, airtime is defined as the ball suspended in the air without being touched. But to
Mm-hmm.
reinforce or to enforce a bias on this, I would take a ball from my basket
Mm.
and I'd throw it to one of the participants and they'd throw it back to me. Okay, I'm going to try and choose someone I think is going to catch it. Yeah, but it doesn't really matter. And then I tell them this is an example of airtime. Okay, so what I've done there is I've essentially told them that you need to throw the balls between each other. Right, the balls need to be thrown. But I haven't told them that's not the rules. It's not what we've written down. But because I've done that action,
Right.
I've seeded this bias, which is important. Because once you the reality is once you try to do that in the game, it makes you a hell of a lot slower. Yeah. So that's the first rule. So the second rule is that everybody must touch every ball, right? So this is important, right? So you want to go through this rule quite quickly, right? Because normally people will hear it and absorb it as everybody must handle every ball, right? Everybody must hold every ball all the time. But you word it very specifically, everybody must touch every ball. And it's that word touch is the misunderstood or the ambiguous word. That sometimes teams get that quite early, sometimes teams don't get that at all. That you don't actually have to handle the ball in order to touch it or be touched by it. So there's that. So you go past that rule quite quickly because it seems obvious and clear and simple, but it's there's a little bit of a quirk in there. So the next rule is that you may not pass to your immediate left or your immediate right. Okay, so to facilitate that, you just stand between two people and I can't do this and I can't do this, right? So which is planting two cognitive biases, right? First bias is that you have to be now only passing forward, so you have to be opposite the person you're passing to, but the real bias there is the word pass, right? The rule doesn't say you must pass the ball. The rule is you may not pass the ball to the left or to the right, but passing the ball really isn't part of the requirement of the game at all. Yeah. So I've now planted the fact that you should pass the ball, even though that's not actually a rule of the system. Okay. So it's cool. So now we're building up all of this sort of system of understanding of rules around the game, which are all kind of a bit fakey. Yeah. The next rule is about how the ball is introduced into the system and how the ball exits the system. And it's the hardest rule to write down because there's lots of words, and it's probably the hardest rule to convey. But so I tend to do it with a person. So if it's say Fred, if you're the person that took, and now use a color because all the balls I use are all like nice color ones. If you were to take this particular red ball out, I then walk Fred over to the other basket. You must be the person who eventually puts the ball into here. That's the question I'm going to ask. Does that make sense, everyone? Right, because it's a weird rule, but the person who takes must be the person who puts it in. Which is there isn't any biases about that other than it's the one rule that creates energy and movement, right? Because that person now has to be at both places. And the reason why I put the baskets across the room from each other is to make this rule hard. Yeah, so the person's now got to run. This rule creates lots of running. It's quite fun. Right? So then but that also gives our energy higher. It's cool. And then the last rule is drop balls are out. Okay, so if the ball touches the ground, it's out. Don't try to recover it. So this rule is there for a couple of reasons. It's there to make the game flow better because people chasing balls around are not. It means that they're moving away from the actual team flow a little bit, which complicates things. It also allows us to, if we want to, reflect upon the cost of change, right? So if we try an experiment, which wasn't a great experiment, it was a difficult experiment, required us to practice a bit, then we're going to probably drop a lot more balls than we would have done if we'd carried on something safer but slower. Right, so so it gives us a sort of a debriefable focus point at the end of the day if it's important to do so. So those are the rules. So it doesn't sound. Okay. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but there's actually not too much there. And each of those rules are, other than like the drop ball one, they've all got some element of of fun in them.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. And look, they're written down. They're actively introduced by you. Some are even demonstrated. And then, as you mentioned, you will immediately push them into the start, saying, "Okay, you got 1 minute to think about how you will manage to, get the balls from one point to the other point, and start." Right. So you immediately visualize the time box. You just look at your watch. You just say, "Okay, go and
Yeah.
figure it out."
So I don't tend to visualize you, but I guess you could do so. So one of the more difficult things about facilitation in this game is keeping it tight, right? Because you're going to, as a facilitator, you're going to want to give them more time in their reflection period, right? Because you're nice people and you want them to have better
Right.
conversations and you want them to get to the end of it. But the downside of that is this game can expand to an hour if you let it, right? Because they will talk forever.
Mm.
So I find it's better to tell them up front that this game is going to be like clockwork, right? I'm not gonna give
Mm-hmm.
you much
Yep.
on any way of buffering. As soon as I say go, go. All right, and there's a little bit of challenge in that for you in the game, but that's okay. So
Okay.
I would tend to time box on my phone, and give me orders. So I tend to work with a little bit of flexibility, but
Mm-hmm.
also being very conscious of the amount of time I'm spending because ultimately I don't want to constrain our opportunity to debrief.
Definitely, definitely. But look, let's do a quick calculation here. So you got 5 iterations. The duration of an iteration is 2 minutes, so that's roughly
Yep.
10 minutes. You got the, explaining the rules, uh, setting everything up. That's 1 minute. And what happens between the
So they get
iterations?
again additional periods of time to reflect upon what just happened and what we could do differently. Right. So this is like an analog
Right,
of a
right, and
retrospective or no or review.
right, and that's roughly like a minute.
So it varies. I've tried both a minute and 2 minutes, and I think for me the 2 minute one gives them a slightly better opportunity to learn. I found when I go fast 1 minute
Mm.
ones, I'm having to prompt them a little bit about challenging some of their assumptions, right? Because
Mm.
it's not very much time for them to have a good conversation and to potentially. So sometimes, I mean, one of the interesting and one of the magical things you can see happening in teams that are doing this is that they try out some ideas within that period of
Mm.
time. What would happen if we do this? And they give it a quick go, which is quite cool, right? That's a admirable approach to prototyping an idea before you take it into
Right.
reality. So I guess I would be cognizant of my time box if I'm part of like a bigger, longer workshop, and the facilitator for that is only giving me,
Mm.
45 minutes tops, then I'm going to be tighter on my time. I might use a 1 minute or a very very tight 2 minute time box. But if I know that I've got an hour-ish, and no one, I can play with that time, then I can be a little bit more flexible about the amount of time that they're going to take. But
Mm.
I'm going to keep the pressure on the whole time. But I might say, okay, you've only got a minute left, and I might give them a minute and a half because I'm nice. But I want them to feel the pressure of time, but have the opportunity to do a decent conversation, have a decent conversation.
Right, right. Okay, great. So that's another, impediment there, having the time pressure. But look, I can now imagine they're testing, as you mentioned, they're doing their little retros, they're improving. What happens? Can you just share a couple of things that you observe as a facilitators, maybe conclusions that they draw while being in action? What do you want them to discover? Are there any comments or reflections
Yeah,
from your
sure.
side on what is actively facilitated while they're
Yes,
playing?
it's a super interesting game to observe, right? So, I mean, this is as a segue. One of the reasons I love this game is it allows me to get a good read of a team or group of people I'm going to be working with, right? Because it does allow
Mm-hmm.
them to really express who they are and how they work and how they think and how they interact, right? So from a coach point of view, observing that is really interesting. Um, but yeah, so on the first, so the first that you've only got a minute to think about it is quite deliberately short, right? Because you don't want to overthink of it. You don't want to come up with because we're in the agile world, right? So we don't want a robust and difficult, a long-term strategy. except to define how to do these things. You want to just try it, test and learn, test and fail, right? So given a very short amount of time, which then means that their first iteration is going to be awful, right? They're going to be throwing the ball to each other, and there's going to be some weird and wonderful pattern they're trying to follow, and lots of balls are going to be dropped on the floor. And they probably get through 10 or 20 balls in that 2-minute window. It's pretty poor, but that's good, right? Because it will present many options to make that better. So
Right.
So this is facilitatory wise, it's interesting, right? So there is an element of trying to observe the rules are being observed. Yeah. So they are supposed to be following the rules, but I tend not to look that closely, right? I look for the obvious cheating, or the obvious omissions, right? But generally speaking, the teams will try quite hard to keep within the rules because you created the system around them. So I'm not going to look for like, did everybody actually touch it? Because that requires you as a facilitator to track every ball through every person. That isn't ever happening. I'm just going to look for the spirit of the rules being observed and upheld. So that's the importance of a facilitator, right? The second thing, as a facilitator, you're observing interaction, you're observing frustration, you're observing energy, these sorts of things. Are they, how are they working together? It's also quite instrumental and informative going forward, right after the session, potentially, as you and also gives you a potential debriefing angle that talks about the dynamics of the thing and how the interaction changes throughout the game. So they'll get through the first 2 minutes, and it will be disappointing. And at this point, you're just straight into a reflection period, 2 minutes or 1 minute to reflect upon how well. And the instructions are very simple. You've got 2 minutes now to think about how that went and work out what you could do differently as a team to get more balls across next time. Sometimes this is the point where I reveal we're going to be doing this 5 times, right? So because there is an art form to drip feeding the information they need at the right time. So the right time they need to know that they're going to be doing this more than once is now, right? So but sometimes it's at the front. It doesn't matter a great deal. But they're going to say we're going to do this again. So take 2 minutes to think about it and see what you did better. And so they'll talk about it, and they will start to optimize what they're already doing. Okay, so there's going to be the throwing stuff. It's going to be the standing opposite stuff. So they won't be particularly challenging any of their approach to it necessarily, or all the rules which are constraining them, right? So they will optimize. The person who's doing the picking and ending up and putting generally ends up running faster after the first iteration. So they're having to work harder and faster, right? They may start to put in more than one ball across at a time. Those sorts of things, kind of sort of almost suboptimal optimizations. Yeah, small tweaks on it will come across. So they'll come up with some ideas though. So there are lots of different opportunities to facilitate this different ways. So some people like to have the scoreboard a little bit more verbose. So they record not just how many balls were transported across in 2 minutes, but they record how many balls were dropped, so they went out of the system, and they also record the experiment that the team are going to take on to the next iteration. So, for example, with our experiment, all the summary of our experiment is we're going to be putting 4 balls across rather than 1. Per person. So there's an interesting, because more sort of reflectable material at the end if you wanted to do that. The downside is that then the facilitation around the end of that debrief is a little bit longer, so you're breaking the flow of the game a little bit.
Because you need to make sure that they come up with something that you can A, write down, and B, that they have a clear shared understanding, but also a commitment to which experiment they want to do now.
So I mean, there's some good form in that, right? So there's I mean, if you look at a normal retrospective sort of opportunity, you want to come out with that with some actionable outcomes which are widely understood and specific enough to actually do, so we know how we're going to do How are we going to experiment together? So, but you've got such a crunched period of time to achieve that. It's I don't know. I tend not to. I think because I think when you start doing that, you are hitting the hour point. And for me, the realities of the world is that we work in hour chunks, right? And that's very traditional, but it is the truth. And therefore, within my hour chunk, I need to get a debrief happening as well. So I want to streamline it a little bit. Just so I skipped over actually. So while the game is happening, you're observing and all those sorts of things. So you may be counting. You may be so as a facilitator, you're observing, but you're also keeping the game happening. So you may be counting the dropped balls. Okay, and I'm just going to keep a mental count of these, and I'm going to pick them up and I'm going to return them to the opening bucket. Okay, because that way I don't have to do that in their retrospective period of time. Or if you've got a second facilitator, then that's even better. So just to keep on top of it, because balls will fly off and go everywhere, right? You have to go retrieve bastards. And then in the retrospective part, in the reflection part of it, they'll have a burning need and it gets bigger and bigger as the game progresses to count how many balls they go across. But they've only got a minute or 2 minutes to reflect. So what I tend to say to them is just forget about the balls for a second, think about what just happened and talk about how you can be better, and I'll count the balls and let you know how many you got. Okay, so now you're a facilitator, your job is now to count the balls, right? So I'm remembering how many they've dropped, right? I know there's 100 to start with, so sometimes later on in the game you can do maths to work it out, count the other way, but some way work out how many there are and record it on your chart. So and I tend to interrupt their debrief halfway through, so okay, you got 50 balls across, whatever it is, just to let them know so they can. Because there's an element of celebration with that often. That's cool. This is very nice. Gets the energy back up again. But it gives them the information system in order to prime what they're going to be doing next. Another facilitation option at this point, or the end of the reflection period of time, is to ask them the question: how many do you think you can get across now? Right. So predict with the changes you're about to make how much of an impact that happens. That's how it was originally taught to me. I've dropped doing that because I don't think it really adds a great deal. And certainly how I debrief on it anyway, because I'm a advocate of no estimates and those sorts of things, right? So the predictive sort of outcome thing isn't that interesting. What's interesting is the experiments that you're gonna take on and your belief in that experiment being a useful experiment.
But do you see an urge for groups to improve, right? So if you say, look, you got 50 this time, I mean, I could imagine, and I've observed that there's immediate spark. Oh, we can do more, right? We can just hit that number.
Yes, so they will sub-optimize into a pattern that's as good as they can get it within the constraints of the team of the game. This will happen in round 2 or round 3. So one or two things for me happens. Either that they start to realize that they can challenge the rules. So they realize, can we move the baskets? Or, can we, is airtime, is that a real thing? Or is just dropping it into the basket an example of airtime? Right. The answer to those two questions is yes, of course you can. Right. And so they'll either start to realize that they can challenge rules or through, right? If they haven't, so let's say that we've now done two full rounds, and I can listen to their conversations in the retrospective. They're not talking about challenging some of those constraints. I might give them a hint. I might just draw their attention to a rule that may not be what you think it is. Right. So that might be about airtime. That might be. So why the basket's the other side of the room, right? Or just to give them an idea that that everything may not be as it seems.
Okay, so they go back and forth, but they check in with you, and you say yes, and you give them a little hint. Are there any constraints that they barely or never, or maybe that you would say only very mature teams, or I don't know, what sparks challenge?
So it's interesting. I think it's not really so much about the team or the maturity of the team; it's about the organization. Right. So if I'm working in a bank or a kind of an old school corporate, then they are less likely to want to hack the system naturally, right? They're not looking for those opportunities. They're quite comfortable working within the boundaries of their system and the constraints of that system. Yeah, they like their rules, and the rules define what we do. So they will try to optimize within the rules, right? So those are the sorts of guys you're going to have to give them some sort of inspiration about why is this true? Why so where does it say you have to touch? Everyone has to touch every ball, or where does it say everyone has to handle every ball? And something like that. You're depending on what they're experimenting on. You can also see their pattern and how they're solving the problem now. What might be instrumental for them to make a significant leap forward in their performance. And I wouldn't tell them the answer, but I'm going to give them a clue. And then normally that clue's strong enough, and oh shit, Christ, yes, what? And then suddenly you go from this, because the energy starts to go down when they stop understanding, well, how on earth can we go faster? And then you give them a clue. Right. And then there are other teams. So the other way, sometimes I do that. So if I'm working with teams that are looking to challenge the system but haven't worked out where the challenges are yet, I might drop in the lovely line, or the bait that. So you're doing really well. So far the world record for this is 450 balls. You got a little way to go yet, but I'm sure you'll get there. Right. So that's a really great inspiration, right? Because if you're stuck at 50 balls, how on earth are we going to get 450? We must be doing something wrong. Yeah, and that creates another great conversation. What on earth do we do radically differently than we are doing now? So it's just a little bit of a incentivizer.
Great. Look, there's so many variations, and I like that. We're exploring the bits and pieces where you, as a facilitator, while A, designing that game, and B, while facilitating that game, can make active choices to either you make it a little bit harder, make it easier, to spark, to plant a couple of ideas. And I really do think this is our job when facilitating serious games. Now, before we come to the debriefing questions and the other opportunities to grow, I would like to ask you, is there any special experience you had with this ballpoint game? Any group that just comes to your mind where you think, wow, look, they really did something that was totally unexpected or that surprised you?
Yeah, so I guess there's a general group of people that play this game that just do extremely well. So, and that's worrying as a facilitator, right? Because you want to create enough experience to draw off of, to learn from, right? So if they've already gone like above 100 balls in round 3, right? Where are they going to go from there, right? So, so psychologically, I have to become comfortable with the fact that I'm going to get them to go play 2 more rounds, and they may not see as significant leaps forward as they were before, but I'm comfortable with that because they will experiment with something new. They will try something and it will succeed, or try something and it will fail, and that's okay. And so, in that experimentation, they tend to find small jumps forward anyway, I think that's great, because you can still reflect upon the journey of your early acceleration was massive, and then you started to get into more iterative acceleration as you went on. This is quite a good analog for how mature teams work anyway, which is quite cool. The other interesting things with this game are when teams, there's a few things. So one thing to look out for is that a very common pattern when teams realize that they can hack the system is that they will try to do this kind of dishwasher thing where everyone puts their hand in the basket and swishes it about a little bit, and then passes the basket around and then pulls it into the thingy. So you have to see that happening, because you're going to stop it from being a successful outcome, right? Because you cannot demonstrate that everybody has actually interacted with every ball in doing that. It's too random. So, but as a facilitator, it's really important to see that early so that you can redirect them into a different way of thinking quickly. Otherwise, they'll waste the entire iteration. That becomes very hard when you're working with multiple teams. Yeah, because you have to be your eyes
True,
everywhere
true.
to make sure, because that is almost guaranteed to happen to at least one team, or if not many teams will attempt that, and you don't want them to lose the opportunity to try something different. Um, Another really cool pattern that I love is that often a team will try to do something and it will fail horribly, right? So they'll go sort of, we got
Mhm.
10 balls through, we got 30 balls through, we got 70 balls through. We tried something stupid and it went down to 15 balls through again, right? Right, and that's brilliant, right?
Mm.
So as a reflectable experience, that's really cool about the experimental nature of continuous improvement, and it's
Yeah, yeah,
fine.
and the cost for changing things. Look, Chris, I've written down a couple of things that you could zoom into, things that you could debrief, right? The continuous improvement, the retrospectives, the prototyping, the explicit experiments, hacking the system, or challenging the constraints, and also from improving what you're doing into introducing really innovative practices. Are there any other domains that you love to reflect? And of course, I will ask you, what is your favorite debriefing question? Is if there's one?
Kind of, there's all sorts, right? So and so that it really depends on where you're starting from and what you hope to get out of a bit. So
Hmm.
you can ask different questions to shoot down that avenue. There's a whole bunch around team dynamics and working together, right? So you could use this game as a purely team building game, right? Because it is working together to solve a problem, right? And to create decisions and to debate and to
Hmm.
sometimes argue and get frustrated, and there's a lot to talk about how that went. So you could use this game to see like a team charter, for example, about the sorts of behaviors that work
Mm-hmm.
well for us and sorts of behaviors that don't work well for us. You could, I mean, if you're in the agile world and you're looking to bring home some of those principles and values, you can pretty much tease them all out in this game in some way, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you have to try
definitely.
a little bit creatively sometimes, but there I'm
Hmm.
sort of confident that if you were to ask the team to, it's kind of a different type of a debrief, but if you ask the team to having experienced this game, correlate what they felt, what they saw, what they observed with the full set of agile principles, they will be able to correlate that. Right? They can see they'll see how this particular
Mm.
idea is manifested in the game in some way, which is really powerful. If your ultimate game is to
Right.
land cognizance and connection with the agile principles, doing it via the experience we have is really powerful. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah,
Okay. Wow.
lots of things.
As you mentioned, look, during the conferences where you explicitly go into a session to play a game, or of course also during this recording, we're focusing on the game, but it always comes with a context. It always comes with specific, let's call them prime participants. They're ready to make this experiment and to explore what happens, and the rest is an emergent knowledge that just shows, and that's also our job to reflect that and to make it
I
discussable.
guess I tend not to worry about those sorts of things, right? So because you can overthink, like who are the people in here, and who are the people who are like like ESVP exercise, right? Who are the explorers, who are the shoppers, who are the navigators, and who are just made to be here? I don't really care, right? Because I believe it's a fun
Mm.
experience. I believe that generally speaking, people are children. Or they have got a child at heart, and if you can allow them to experience and express that, they will have some fun, right? So I mean, that's the minimum bar for me. People will have a bit of a laugh playing this game, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
good chance that you're going to find something interesting in it for yourself.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I would definitely conclude after using this, for 10 years or, 6 plus X years, again, the same game dynamics. but the way you facilitate it, the way you anticipate the group, the context that you're in, the context that the participants are in, always creates a new outcome, but also a new space to reflect and to learn and to improve. Yeah, definitely, definitely. So what do you then do? I mean, how are the reflections and the experiences and the insights that the participants come up with after the game translated into their future behaviors? So you mentioned, for example, a team charter, or what else do you do to help them to make it stick?
So it depends. So for example, like if this game, sometimes the last time I played this game was a couple of weeks ago, and it was part of a marketing department offsite. Right, so all of the marketing guys here got together, and which they don't do very often because they're quite distributed. And so there was a day of talking about what the year is going to be like and what their challenges were and what goals needed to be and all those sorts of things, right? But there's also there was a sense of that we need to be working together a little bit, right, on things. So for me, that's because it was part of a longer day. The outcomes are can be a bit lighter. So with those guys, because we were playing four teams concurrently, and you shouldn't underestimate the amount of noise that can make. It's very, very noisy and very, very excited, and everyone's very energized and that sort of stuff, right? Which is so lots of different outcomes tip. But it was important to reflect upon it a bit. So we used a liberating structure 1, 2 for all style debrief for that. It's quite light, but to getting people to reflect upon what happened in this game and what was interesting about it, right? So it's again a really light debrief, right? It's not guided, it's not it's not targeted in any way, but just to take that opportunity that actually what some other teams or other people experienced may have been interesting to you to help you make sense of what you experienced, right? Which was good enough, because the overall outcome that the marketing leads wanted really was connection and having fun together and building relationships and those sorts of things, right? So the teams were formed of people who don't normally work together anyway, and having a break from some of the boring stuff. So that was okay. It's a lighter style. But if I'm working with a team, right? So now I'm they're playing this game for more solid reasons, right? So perhaps their continuous improvement cycle doesn't exist yet, or is always failing, right? So things aren't happening. So you could take those experiences and then bring it back to reality, right? So what can we as a team learn from this experience? And you do that in all sorts of ways. I've used a debriefing cube to premise that thing, or you can guide the guide the thing itself. Generally speaking, the game is going to generate insight, right? And what you do with that insight is up to you. You can either go straight to some actionable outcome. So what can we do differently, guys? How can we get our 450 balls across? But in our day job, right? In our delivering whatever it is that we do, or you can segue into some sort of root cause analysis, right? So what's happening in our world? Where are we failing at getting better? Why are we in a rut? And start to explore that a little bit. So I guess it very much dependent on the team, but you can take some of so the game. It's very lightest is just demonstrating that continuous improvement does work, right? So which is a good cognitively. That's a very strong place to be, because if you haven't got that in your world, then that's interesting, because it's going to be something that's admirable. Maybe we should have that as us in our world.
Okay.
Right? And you got leap from that into a place where you make it actually happen.
Okay. Wow. Look, I have 2 more questions, right? How can I possibly how can I possibly thought that I could, put your 10 years experience with a ballpoint game in a 50-minute episode, right? But look,
Sorry.
2 final questions. No worries. It's great. Maybe we just have to do a part 2 of this conversation. But look, one question, I guess I mentioned it earlier, I mean, this game is a serious games classic, right? Or an agile game classic these days. So many people heard of it, read about it, saw it on YouTube, saw it being played during conferences. So, what happens if you play this with a bunch of participants, or maybe only a few participants have been in this experience before? Does it still work?
So the answer is yes. So you would look at why. Okay. Firstly, I've always worried about that as well, right? Because the awesomeness of the game is impacted somewhat by the fact that some or all of the participants have experienced it before.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to, and that's a fear rather than a reality. So, but the reality is it's not likely to be true. So that hasn't happened to me so far, right? And that a significant portion, or very many of the people I've played with, have actually played it before. It feels like it's reality because we're in a bubble of serious gaming, right? So in
True.
our bubble, it feels like everyone's playing this shit. But actually, in the real world, for the people who we work with, this is still unusual, right? Playing any sort of game in the real world is unusual. This game
Mm.
specifically is super unusual, right? So it isn't really something that actually happens. Now, it has happened that a person or a couple of people might have done it before, right? And but human nature is wonderful in this sense because they'll immediately reflect. Oh, I've seen this. Okay, cool. Would you mind playing this game, but in a silent way? Right. So I'll give you, or you give them options. So you have an option. You can play this game, but try hold back on the things that you know about this game to allow everybody else to experience it
Mm.
how you did originally, or you can be an observer and then help us at the end to reflect on what you've observed.
Okay.
Okay, so you can facilitate into a way that still allows everybody to get some experience out of the experience.
Mm. Okay, great, great. Yeah, we really have to think about a silent version. Yeah, perfect, perfect. And Chris, this is look my final question. Our hour is almost up. Do you have an ultimate facilitation tip for all the serious games facilitators out there, or someone who's so inspired now and wants to try the ballpoint game? What is your ultimate facilitation tip?
I guess the you asked me you asked me my favorite debriefing question around this, right? So I think the two are probably the same thing,
Hmm.
right? Because if is it, this is kind of like the 110% thing, right? Because you could do everything else right, but to get that last 10%, you can ask the question: Who in the room knows most about succeeding in this game? Okay, and they will look at each other and they'll maybe choose one person, and then you know, disagree, right? And they ask the
Mm.
question again: Who in the room knows the best about succeeding in this game? And then someone's going to look at you and say, "You, yeah, you're right. I played this game 100 times. So why didn't you ask me how to succeed?" Right? And then
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
final cognitive bias, right? That the
Mm.
facilitator, the game master, is there to work against you and not work with you, right?
Mm.
And that's another. It just sort of compounds what they've already experienced about the systems around them controlling what it is that they do and how they do it, and that they need to challenge those things in order to really achieve excellence.
Hmm. Wow. Powerful. Powerful. And I so have this quote of Tiagi in my head, right? So don't count the number of your games. Make the games that you play count, right?
Mm.
And you showed us, Chris, and thanks for sharing all your expertise and knowledge. You showed us how you can use one game dynamic that is well known in our bubble, that is well documented out there, right? Videos, blog posts, this episode, and many other experiences that our listeners might have with that game or around that game, that you can use it to focus, either to focus the team or to at least open up a space where they can explore how they, as a group, as a team, can improve. And that is powerful within
Yeah,
itself, I would
it's a
say.
cracking game, and I think it's why it really is a classic. It's a staple of our
Mm.
job. It's not because it's old or well known. It's because it works. Yeah, and it's versatile and it's fun and it kind of. There's not very many games that tick all the boxes, but this is
Mm.
probably one of
Now I can see why this is your favorite game. Chris, thank you so much for your time, right? And
No worries.
thanks for all those insights. And again, maybe we're just gonna have a second conversation on this game, or maybe on a different topic. There are many other things that we could talk about. I'm looking forward to see you, maybe at Play 14, maybe somewhere else, maybe just during our random visit to the UK or Berlin. Thanks to all our listeners, and till next time, bye-bye.
Cheers.
You can reach us at hello@keylearning.net. We're looking forward to your suggestions, comments, and feedback.